The main task I have here right now is that first, I don't know if the beginning matches the end of the cycle, and second, I need to convert a forward cycle into an in-place cycle. What can be done for this? I need to make sure that by the end of the cycle, the main ends up under the character exactly where it was at the beginning. Reparenting will help here. We reparent the pelvis. And, for example, now we can easily adjust the main. We could look at these translate Z values and adjust them, but that's not very convenient. We can constrain this main to this reparented locator. I'll make it bigger, so it basically moves together with the pelvis. We can constrain the main to the locator. Great, we couldn't do this before because it would create a cycle and everything would break. But we can do it with the locator because it's outside this hierarchy, constrain main to the locator, but only in Z, so it moves forward together with it in play. After this, we can bake it and see what happens there. Most likely it will have nonlinear forward movement because the pelvis in walking walk is quite specific and moves in a particular way. But that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the first point where the pelvis is at 0 relative to the main, and here. So I delete all this animation. Main is what moves linearly forward in the future, and the character is underneath it. Excellent. After this, we can bake this locator, bake and delete. And our animation will be already with a moving main. This is a way to transition from a forward cycle to an in-place cycle. After this, we can mute all the attributes on the main, but actually we're interested in translate Z mute selected. Then the character will stand still and we get that in-place cycle we're used to working with. All of this is not yet about working on the animation. This is still about creating this control system, bringing everything to a unified standard. This is important to me because cycles often blend with each other. In this case, the legs are still in FK mode and controlling them is practically impossible. So let's work on bringing the legs to an IK system. What do we need for this? We need to find out how this control moved. This is basically the control of the future IK leg. We'll create another frame, an intermediate or auxiliary one like this. I'll select all controllers, control set, and make frame -1, in which I'll zero out all translates and rotates. In this rig, it brings the character to T-pose. This is needed so I can later adjust and fit the leg under the IK leg. So this is a temporary placeholder. I'll expand the range. I'll need it for reparenting. I'll set -1, -1 as the beginning. So what do we do next? We need to find out how this leg actually moved. We can do, for example, reparent this leg to quickly create a locator that will be where this leg is. The same can be done for the other leg. In theory, we could create a locator and just constrain it to the leg, then bake and all that, but this is faster. So, at zeros. Many of these controls stand here. Everything seems okay. We can now switch to delete animation mode. Switch to IK legs mode to these reparented locators. Constrain the legs. Just do parent constrain. And to this locator, I constrain this leg and parent. So now the IK legs work as we need them to. What's the catch here? The thing is, I used to have fingers that rotated nicely, at least in this mock-up animation, because I animated them somehow. And these are different controls. IK fingers and FK fingers. I wouldn't want to lose this animation either, so I'll take the fingers too and switch the legs back to FK mode. It's important that we delete this animation, this attribute, so that if I set FK legs here, there'll be FK legs throughout the entire section. So I have these locators, they're small, I can make them bigger, control size. Here, switch the legs to FK mode to VK mode. And while the legs are still here and KFK are the same, constrain these fingers to these locators. I don't need translates, only orients, because these controls won't move, they'll only rotate. Shoulder blade with locator, constraining these fingers as a result. Now the fingers will also be animated in the walk cycle. You can hide the control locators. You can see they're rotating there and behaving somehow. What else haven't we done in IK legs? There are pole vectors that control where the knee is pointing. For example, in a walk cycle, especially during the leg swing phase, it might move the knee somewhere. We also need to figure out this control, what's happening with the knee. Let's go back to these IK legs. Create locators that will be in the same place as these knees. Create with script. Move them forward somewhere, move the rigs forward, and constrain them to these knees. Then we'll find out how, basically through parent constraint, how these knees basically moved. Because knees, in any case, how they move depends on these controls. Take these locators, bake them. This way, we remember how these controls moved. Knees. Go back to FK mode. And now constrain these controls to these locators. They don't have rotates, so we'll use point constraint in this case. That'll be simpler. And use all attributes. Something might display strangely right now. You can just jump around the animation back and forth, and they'll work it out. It's a graphics card glitch that happens sometimes. Or a Maya thing. So now we know how not only the leg controls move, but also how the knee controls move. That is, we've converted the legs from FK mode to FK mode. Why am I using this rather visually archaic approach again? Yes, I know there are various tools, bake, IK to FK. IK. So what do we have? We have animation that basically satisfies me completely. Next, I'll bake, probably more reliably, all the controls I have on the character. Here, after this, you can do bake and delete. The reparented locators will go away. These locators don't do anything anymore. So I have the default first pose. I needed it to position and adjust the legs. Now all this is no longer needed. I select all controls and delete this helper key. And I set it so everything starts from 0 and ends at frame 30. Here we can see that the beginning and end don't quite match up. We can move the last key with the middle mouse button to the last frame and press S, and everything will be keyed. When there are especially rotates, they lead to some terrible over-rotations. And here, for example, one of my parts has something around 700 degrees. How do you bring this back to some initial state? But the first thing you can do, of course, is Euler filter. It won't help much because some axes will still end up somewhere out there. I have this trick where I go back to frame -1. Euler filter works from the nearest possible left key. I create it. I select all controllers, insert key, set it to 0. The character will collapse somehow. If your character breaks, this happens sometimes. Some rigs aren't capable of being reset. You can zero out all rotates, select all rotates here, and zero them out so nothing behaves strangely. After that, you can select all curves and apply Euler filter. And all of this will be like working relative to a possible 0. So the range immediately becomes not 500 degrees, but no more than 100, and here also no more than -100. After that, we can delete this auxiliary key that we created again. This way, we fitted everything together, made it more natural. Overall, there still wasn't any animation. Everything was just about bringing it all to the initial state, making the work editable in general. So it would be somehow more manageable. Next, what to do with the legs, because in the mockup, I ended up with this control constantly rotating like this. Well, like a rotate, and that's kind of not cool apparently. Let's do the following. We'll lock it. This control is responsible for lifting. Uh, we'll take these two controls and reparent them too. What's convenient about this? That I'm not rotating this leg now. This doesn't affect the foot at all, except the only thing that affects the knee. So that nothing gets broken or lost, I'll reparent these knee controls too. Then no matter what I rotate here, everything will be okay. What do we know about this control that interests us most? That we never rotated on X, neither one nor the other. So I can definitely delete rotate X in the animation and make it 0. What else do we know? That here it's not very convenient to create these tilts through rotate and through the Z attribute either. So I'm deleting rotate Z too. Rotate Y I'll probably keep because, well, I think, what do they do? Oh, they twist around. So I won't keep it. Delete selected, I'm removing all rotates, so the legs just walk forward and backward. That's it. And all the turns that might happen will be created through this control. What else do we get here? These controls now fly off somewhere into the unknown because they detach relative to this control. Ideally, it should be like this, but it flew off somewhere. But we know where they should be, where these toes should be. We can move this control somehow like this here, where its center is located. How to find out where the center of this control is located? Here, here, here. Go into this control, it's constrained, and therefore maintains some position in space. But when I move the control, it lies within, it changes its parameters. I open the editor attribute, go to the very beginning, to the first tab of this control, do copy tap, and I'll see where I need to place it to essentially zero out all values by, I probably don't need super precision here, but I set it by Y, by Z somewhere, for example, here. And by X, I need to move it somewhere here. So in order for this control to be oriented this way here, we can use this thing. What might be inaccurate now is that it doesn't touch the ground. This is because it actually does touch. It's just that the toes are turned like this. We'll correct this over time too. We adjusted the control so that relative to this original leg rotation control, it was 0. This locator, we can constrain this leg to it, but with offset necessarily main, and offset we choose control. We choose locator, we choose this control, and apply. As a result, the leg moves with it. The same thing can be done with another control. We go to some point that's convenient for us, and for example, somewhere here, we choose this control. See what happens to it, copy tab, so that this panel doesn't change no matter what I select. And we also adjust this control somewhere here. Height-wise, it's somewhere, for example, here. Forward, backward, it's somewhere here. Left-right movement is somewhere here. So we adjusted it. Now we can constrain this control to this locator, apply. Now they will move together, and all the animation that was previously created by this control will now be created by a more correct foot position. After this, we can bake these controls, thus fixing the animation. And we can even do for these controls, select these locators, bake and delete. This way we've set it up so that now these controls, if you look closely in Graph Editor, their changes are practically 0. That is, in principle, this can be zeroed out because there shouldn't be any animation on these attributes anyway. That was the plan. Everything is again about bringing this all to a simpler, more digestible version. Next, I do the following. I'm bothered by this penetration of legs through the ground. With legs, it's generally quite a complex story because there are different control methods, and it's quite a fragile topic. So I'll be a bit where I'm already coming to the point where I want to start animating. I go to the legs and see if there are any places in the attributes, in the controllers, where legs fall below ground. This is this part, so I select everything that's less than 0 and set it to 0. The leg doesn't go underground, neither one nor the other. Everything below 0, I return to 0 value. Then we get that at least the feet don't slip. Everything behaves strangely for now. This leg starts to hang, but at least the legs don't slide. We get something more natural. How to recreate this story? Well, first of all, the toes, I think, are doing work they shouldn't do. Namely, they regulate this effect, whether the foot stands on the ground with toes or not. I'll remove this story. I don't need it. And I'll replace it, like I'll start working here as if this were a full cycle. What happens? I'll work with this leg that's closer to us and copy the other animation. Ideally here, when the girl steps, what was another feature of the previous animation, let me bring it back now, was that she walked on tiptoes as if she had heels. My task will also be to make sure there's no feeling of heels, but as if she's walking for real. Here, standing on the ground. So I'm looking for this static position. Here, namely here, ideally, she steps down. And from the moment of contact, it goes, goes, goes. Ideally, it should be standing on the ground. I'm removing the animation from the fingers. Rotate X, I don't need it anymore. And it's important that the foot is currently positioned here. Oh, here's another point. It's not very convenient for me to work because I'm used to always having the first pose be, for example, pose number 1, when the legs are spread apart. It's easier to cycle, easier to work with. We can also pull this off right here immediately. I'll do bacon delete to remove all the constraint locators. I select all the animation curves and enable infinity display so that the first frame, pre-infinity cycle, post-infinity cycle, I enable infinity display. And I shift the animation so that pose number 1 is in the first frame. Specifically, I'm interested in maybe the contact pose. Let's see now. I'll move it with the arrows. Well, for example, let this be it. After this, I bake everything to get a key every frame, not just emptiness and then keys. So here she steps down. Next, I'll start working on the details. Here, probably the step could be like this. Then I'd like the step to be quick and go to 0. So now this animation curve can basically be flipped so that when she's standing on the ground, the foot is on the ground. If I need to lift the foot, for example, most likely this control can perform that function. I can lift it there and refine it somehow, but definitely not with this one. And in this control, I flip the animation curve so that while she's standing on the ground, it's 0, and I can adjust this transition piece to this 0 value. The beginning and end should match, so I can remove extra keys here. There will still be some automatic interpolation and make it all connect properly. And here she steps with her toes, the tips of her toes, then steps with the whole foot. I can now refine this part over time, but in principle, this already looks pretty good. Let the leg be straight. Now I can add this little stepping effect, this bit more of an effect so that not the whole foot steps down at once, but for example, the heel is held up a little. So here the leg can be straight or, for example, slightly raised like this with a little bend. Maybe even like this. There. And this will all happen starting from somewhere here. The toes will gradually start to straighten, contact occurs, the toes gradually step down, but the heel is still raised, and then the heel itself steps down. Wherever you want, that's your decision. So yes, the step down's good, the lift off is strange. The thing is, for example, the pelvis rises higher than needed, and we get this effect where the foot lifts off. So this means I need to start lifting this leg a bit. Somewhere here, I'm looking to see if this can be implemented with just this control. In principle, Yes, it's not breaking yet. The leg doesn't break at the toes, but at the same time, you can already maintain some kind of bend. So, somewhere starting from here, so it turns out that the foot is standing on the ground, not such a long heel contact. Here, it's already starting to rise, maybe even earlier. Yes. And we need to understand up to which frame we can maintain this. Can we still do it here? But in principle, next we gradually reduce some effect. I think this will be approximately like this. Not enough. We can start lifting this leg a little bit earlier. So this leg, I think, is already stepping quite well. There are some twitches in the legs, but that's nothing terrible. We can somehow correct this, work on it more specifically and seriously. Here, we'll probably have to lift this leg more smoothly and a bit earlier relative to the toe tips. Yes, I'm not worrying too much about controlling what's clicking in the knee. We can, of course, work on that a little, lift it earlier somewhere. It's difficult to work with the knee right now and think about why it's clicking because there are many other controls pelvis, rotations, pelvis movements. All of this affects it greatly. So I can do some basic animation, but I don't think this will help much in solving the global problem. I'll come back to this later when I've already worked on, for example, the pelvis. Also, probably here with the leg, I'd like to adjust the foot movement because there might be something residual there. And in general, we forgot about the leg translates. What do we know about the leg? From the moment of contact to the moment of liftoff, the leg movement is linear somewhere around here. This is the main rule when working with cycles. We remove everything unnecessary, make the keys linear. Next, our Y displacement is already 0 because we were killing the animation there. No problems here. But something's happening with the translates. Let's switch to front view and take a look. The leg steps somewhere around here. Then it starts to wobble a little. This is exactly the Mocap problem. No matter how great it is, it's still noisy and shaky. Everything behaves somewhat unnaturally. That's why I removed the animation. While the leg is standing, it stands. There might be some fluctuations on this control, noise in the rotates. Here, for example, Y, this is rotation around its own axis. In this case, I don't think the leg is doing anything serious. I'll just save time, select all controls, and smooth them. Here, maybe I'll smooth this piece to make it more fluid. I like that there's some rotation there, but let it at least not be strobing. Everything's okay here too. Maybe we can clean up the T to Z, remove some unnecessary movements. I try to preserve the character of the animation curve. Just make it smoother and maybe correct something slightly here and there. Adjust it a bit, at least reduce all the noise somewhat. So the leg is already walking quite well. So this other leg doesn't distract me since it's not done. I'll transfer the animation from left to right, right to left. I select all the controls that are responsible for this blue leg. Go into Studio Library. Since my character controls are named the same way, I can safely use the preset mirror this mirroring from male to female. Here we do right to left animation and shift everything to the middle of the cycle. In this case, it's 15 frames, so the legs walk at least symmetrically now. Yes, excellent. This already looks nicer than it did. What's also interesting about working with mocap in general, many people treat this as second-rate work, like, ugh, but it's actually a great subject to study how this works in reality. Plus, even though it has some noise and might be imperfect there, but this is how it happens in reality. And all the laws we studied before in pelvis movement, look, what's the actual amplitude of the pelvis movement up and down? And for example, we can detect that here one step is high, meaning she's positioned lower in this step than here. Here and where else should we have this? Here and here. These extremes, so to speak. Somewhere they're like this, right? It turns out that in one One step she takes slightly higher, another lower. This is about the fact that if we're working on future animation, we can create this variety. The fact that something works more, something less from cycle to cycle. In this case, my task is to bring everything to such a unified version. So I'll also simplify everything here and make some, just bring it more to sinusoids. But overall, the study is very interesting how this works. Left-right swaying. In general, there's some pattern. We can also see that here, for example, 3 degrees extreme, 3.85, 3.58, in the opposite direction, 2.85, for example. It turns out that in this case, one side works somewhat more, so it goes slightly like this, kind of with a slight offset. Overall, this research is very interesting because we can, based on some basic experience and knowing how it's done manually, work with Mocap much easier because I'm like, well, this is nonsense, but this is interesting and this can be fixed. The problem with Mocap is that it's a huge amount of sensors that read a person's character in a suit or with markers. Infrared cameras read it. It's still optical capture or electromagnetic capture. It still creates noise from multiple cameras. And any mocap is something slightly jittery, slightly strange. So the way I work with regular walking, I work the same way here with mocap, starting, for example, with the pelvis. My legs are symmetrical, but the pelvis is probably not very good. Let's see what it has. It has forward-backward movement. This is what I didn't want, for example. I would like the backward movement to be greater on this control. It's more convenient for me to work with this. To accomplish this, I reparent the pelvis and chest controls because they now depend on this root. Checking. Now its forward-backward translates mean nothing. Don't affect anything. Can zero them out. Do bake and delete. We transferred the animation from this control over there. Kind of added it up because there was something on it too. What can we discover? Some jerky movements, for example, on it in general. But for now, I'm only interested in translate Y on this control because, well, basically everything starts with it. So we can discover that we know yes and sinusoids, and everything seems to work according to them or around them. In this case, here's one extreme. Everything matches or is very similar to what we did manually. And here's another extreme. When the leg is minus, conditionally speaking, pose 4, this is the pose of maximum pelvis lift. So it turns out that this and this should conditionally be at least the same. Essentially, we can delete everything that's not a cycle, for example. And here's the question. Either delete what's here or what's there. That is, whatever is convenient for you. I can take any of the pieces and make it more symmetrical for myself. This extreme of dropping this up-down movement, how much do I need it? That's how it turned out in the mock-up, but in this case, it's dragging the leg and it's not about these sinusoids at all. And we can investigate whether we really need this rise here. Maybe that's actually how walks work. But judging by how much it drags the leg, the question is, if we keep it, it'll be a bit bouncy, and I'd have to lift the heel there. There! Maybe there's something interesting about this. But I'll simplify it. I don't need this. So I'll lower it and make this keyframe, make it simpler. We get hello there, please. The same sinusoid that we were making in the walk, with minor exceptions. The fact that it stays down for quite a while, rises quickly, falls more rapidly, and stays down longer. This isn't exactly a pure sinusoid, but that's precisely the subject of investigation. What we can, that's how it works, and that's how it can be. Since I preserve the character of movement and the speed of entry and exit from this bottom point, I'm just making it cleaner now. This is what I'd want to keep from this mock-up. There's nothing else on this control. We can move to the next control, which handles the pelvis. This is the movement, rotation of the pelvis. On the y-axis, as far as I know, it should be 0 because that's what we wanted to achieve. The entire animation of the main pelvis control. I'm interested in how The left-right swaying actually happens because we investigated this topic, and before it was always like this. It turns out, in this case, maybe it's a feature of female walk, maybe it's a feature of this particular female walk. We get this thing where the pelvis moved, let's say here, slowed down a bit, then whoops, and there a little. This way we get this hip swaying. And this is probably what makes the female walk a bit playful. What I personally find inconvenient about working with such cycles is when they're shifted somewhere and the stream isn't clearly marked somehow. I'll do the following. I'll take this animation curve, copy it, and paste it right here. So it's the same, and just delete what's obviously a cycle. This way, it'll be more convenient for me to work with. It'll be easier for me to understand where the beginning and end are. It matches and all that. I'll preserve this effect considering it looks quite impressive and natural. The keyframes look kind of noisy, but the movement turned out quite smooth here. I can clean it up a bit. We can try taking this smooth and applying it a couple of times, make the animation a bit more polished, but suddenly there might be something not very nice there. But overall, this is a good observation that the pelvis goes quite quickly to the side, freezes, and then to the side again. It's such a somewhat uneven movement. Next, we're interested in translate Z. What do we know? This already looks like a double sinusoid. It's the same thing that happens in male walk, which we usually made. Even though the walk is different, female and so specific, it's with such a bit of twice. But here's what happens. Here's one extreme, here's another. And this pose is more or less the same. The legs are there just the same. But it turns out that in one step, she moves a bit faster, well, a bit more forward, and in another, a bit less. The one that's faster or deeper there, I like better. But overall, we need to understand that this is that same double cycle, which is we can delete everything that's not a cycle or everything that's a repeated part of it, and, for example, align it. Thus, the first step and the second will be identical. This key seems strange to me. It's most likely just noise from the mocap. So I'm essentially preserving the character of the extremes, but making it smoother. You can also apply smoothing a couple of times to make it a bit softer. What else do I do every time when checking these animation curves? The thing is, in a walk cycle, one step can be slightly faster, slightly slower. I'm constantly moving curves back and forth and checking if the beginning and end match exactly. That is, this is exactly a double sinusoid where the extreme fits into the entire length of the cycle. Because it could have been something like this, and I thought it was great, perfect, but then I shift it, and it turns out it doesn't match. So it needs to be adjusted so it repeats exactly the same way. Overall, you can check the beginning and end periodically clicking the first frame. I'll have the first 30th, 15th. I can check, in principle, I should have absolutely the same thing on the silhouette. Because since this is supposedly a looped story, the first and last match, but the 15th doesn't. Well, because the pelvis rotations didn't match somewhere, we'll study this more now. So we did the rotation. And by the way, just in case, we also check if this fits into the cycle length. Yes, everything's okay. We did the Z translation. Cool, beautiful, smooth, everything looks similar. Rotations, but here's some mess. X rotations, these little pelvis turns. And here's some mess that's not very clear. I'm trying frantically to remember what we had in the male walk. Ideally, in any case, the beginning and end should match. They do match. But essentially, they should match exactly in X rotations at frame 15 too. And it turns out that in this first pose, there's one pelvis position, and here there's another pelvis position. And most likely this is some strange story that should have come closer to something like this. Overall, we're talking about this being a double sinusoid, and I don't know how this can be adjusted, but it seems like what should have been there. Something like this. Several peaks. It would be difficult for me here to try to somehow. So I rely on the knowledge I have, namely that we need a double sinusoid. I only need one piece. peak here on the first frame, that same offset, so here it will be +1 on the 16th, then everything will match. I connect the beginning and end, check that the 0th, 1st, 15th, 16th. I check, now everything connects. Since this movement is very insignificant, really small, why did we get such a steep translate X? Because these sensors work very well for translation. But for rotations, they work much worse. So we get fairly clean translates. Here the movement was quite beautiful, and here too. But rotations are more complex, especially such small movements like pelvis turns. So here I have to rely more on knowledge about how this is structured normally if I do it manually. So I'll rotate it more naturally like this. E-rotation. We can see clearly the pattern of this sinusoid here. Here's its extreme. I'll remove the key here to make it more convenient to view and read all of this. And this, theoretically, should be something like the upper part, symmetrically the lower part, if we have a single sinusoid. In the rotation, we can see some interesting pattern. And here there's this small curl that could certainly be smoothed out. And here there's this curl that could also be smoothed out. But I like it. I think there's some kind of pattern in this. This isn't some random noise in one of the curves. It's kind of present here too, this thing, and it's here as well. So I'll keep it. Maybe I'll make it a bit softer somehow to make it neater in terms of curves. Maybe here a little bit like this. Maybe. There. But I think there's something interesting about this. That's why I'll leave it. This is a small dip like this. This goes into the collection of interesting things that can happen with the pelvis, at least in this female walk when she walks like this. Not just a sinusoid that we roughly cut, and there it is. There might be something more specific and interesting. I'll adjust this back a bit to make it probably more symmetrical. Yes. Next, rotate Z. Here's also some mess. What do we know? And there was generally a question whether this is a double sinusoid, triple sinusoid, but let's count. Here's the first one. It would be like this. Here's the second one. This second peak, it would be like this. And here's the third one. This would be the third segment. So this is exactly, they're asking me why I think it's triple. Well, because I've analyzed a lot of data, including Mocap data. It can be expressed to a greater or lesser degree in male or female, but overall this thing is definitely present. And remember, we talked about the triple sinusoid where the centers tend slightly toward, well, the average values kind of go toward the center. If I were doing this manually, and it would be like this, kind of handcrafted, remember, then it would be something like this. It would go from here, reach 0, go up, then go down, also reaching theoretically 0. It would be like this. I'm now making this sinusoid kind of symmetrical. There. However much it goes up, that's how much it goes down. It would probably be even more correct to do it like this. So. And now we're putting everything back by timing and seeing how it all works. My task is not to lose what's there, to preserve and enhance it, make it cleaner without unnecessary jerkiness. And relying, of course, on the foundation I had from working with regular walk cycles. We don't need scales. We've worked on the pelvis, now it's functioning correctly. This control doesn't interest us. What interests us is the left-right swaying of the chest. In principle, everything here is pretty even. If there's some pattern here too, it doesn't really bother me much. I'll just apply some smoothing. Let it be the same, but just a little bit softer. The transition here is a bit concerning. There's some unevenness in this. I want this to flow more smoothly, transitioning from one to another. Essentially, we continue working step by step, bringing everything to some familiar common denominator. Translate Y as the up-down oscillation. I could stress about fixing this now, but it's 0.45 centimeters. So this is something that somehow got lost or coincided from the Mocap. These are those squash and stretch movements. There's no point in stressing too much about it. God willing, let's just hope it doesn't pop, and that's it. So I'm applying smooth, smooth, smooth. It's working, thank God. Well, let this be more symmetrical in terms of the depth of the dip here, and probably I'll take this part a bit and lift it up to here. Along with this key, I'll lift it up here so that since there is squash and stretch, at least it's the same for both steps in both directions. Like this, which is basically something like this: translate Z. This is about forward-backward movement. This is about how in the first step, she moves forward more than needed, and in the second step, less. And this is also about some kind of alignment. Maybe this is about some averaging. Let's do something average. Let's raise this piece a little bit, somewhere like this, for example. And for example, let's lower this one a bit so that this becomes something a bit more averaged. This key is clearly some kind of remnant left over from noise. You can manually adjust it or just click smooth and get a more smoothed curve. We got practically a sine wave. Rotations. Very logical, very beautiful. This looks very similar. There's a dip, rise, pause, then further rise. This happens here too. These zones ideally are repeating parts, but they repeat differently from cycle to cycle. We can also achieve this kind of alignment. This part can be brought down to match this piece. Something like that, and raise this extreme part to the position where as much in one direction, as much in the other, and we got practically an identical curve. Maybe to remove some small noise, we can apply some smoothing. This is unlikely to significantly change the character or make the walk cycle low detailed. We worked on the regular walk cycle with even less detail, but here it looked pretty good. Rotate Y is the swaying of the chest around its own axis. I'm interested in the extremes again. The 10th frame, for example, and this one. These are more or less identical poses. So everything matches, everything's cool. What do we have here in the cycle? This is about left-right swaying. She turns slightly to one side, then there's some rudimentary movement in the opposite direction, like a counter movement, then goes forward. Here too, and again, this happens. This is in one direction, this is in the other direction, and there is this rudimentary little reverse return movement. I like it, it's cool. So apparently for this walk cycle, this works pretty well. I assume that most likely here are the hands that hang down, like one hand goes back, the other forward. Probably this additionally twists the chest a little bit somehow. There. Overall, I like it. It's important to me that the extremes, so here we have roughly how much? 4.77. And here, 472, well, more or less the same. Maybe move it slightly over here. You can, it doesn't matter at all, so everything's super. Just smooth, smooth, smooth. We level out this whole story, maybe adjust it a bit with keys. And rotate Y is ready, rotate Z, translate Z. This is about forward-backward movement. Here we get this story where the chest moves back by this much. How much is the extreme there? 2.44, and here it's 3.4. So in one step, she shifts more forward, the other less. I'm evening this out somehow. I often use these divisions: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Somewhere around 6 divisions up, 6 divisions down. This way we get roughly that the chest is here 2.9, here 2.9, minus 2.9. Well, that's fine. Here too, there's some clear pattern where the chest goes forward, then goes back slightly forward. You can even strengthen this part a little. And again, it returns back. So I try to preserve this character of movement. Smooth, smooth, smooth. If possible, I'd like to give you some guidance, if you'll allow me. Don't just mindlessly smooth everything. Here, it's important And in general, in this task, it's important. For me, this is more of a research subject than, now I'll whip up the animation. How can such things, for example, complex ones, still be looped? Well, for example, like here, because it seems not very clear how it works, which direction to take it. Essentially, what is this? This is half a cycle. We need to get exactly the same half cycle, but in the other direction. We can do edit copy, edit paste. It will paste somewhere around here and scale it in the other direction. We'll get an absolutely identical cycle. You can even compare how much they differ. You can enable show buffer curve here, and then there will be such a substrate under the curve so we can see what was there before. You can compare how much this mockup distorts the situation. We take the curve, edit copy, edit paste. Just always make sure to use this curve buffer display so that, well, nothing gets lost. We bring the beginning to the end, but this distortion coefficient of the mocap is that the character seems to have the same movement, but it's less in some places, more in others. And this is also a good thing. To create a more symmetrical cycle, you can do this mirroring. Then we get more accurate movement changes in both directions. The rotates for the chest are finished. Basically, the head remains next. I think here's the neck. We can start with it, then the head. The global's already set. Cool. Neck rotates. There won't be and shouldn't be any translates. There it is. Neck swaying on rotate X. Rotate X is forward, backward. In this case, as far as I remember, in the walk cycle, it's a double sinusoid. There's some chaos here. But if we start organizing it a bit, what do we have? Here's an extreme at frame 0 plus 2. Ideally, 0 corresponds to the 15th frame, plus 2. Ideally, this should have been an extreme. As much to the left, as much to the right. Basically, we can recreate or reproduce this thing. I hardly think these small jerky movements are possible in the neck. So we can make this sinusoid. It's hard for me to see it like this right now. That's why I don't really like it when the animation of this cycle doesn't start with an extreme. It can be done. There it is, the key. You can add it here, delete it here. We get this movement character. Delete this key too. Here and here. Basically, that's it. From frame 0, 0, 9, 15. So here it's somewhere around 7.5 to 8. And here too, somewhere, for example, 22. The extremes are the same. And we shift by a couple of frames. Basically, there was something similar to this, besides some additional pause movement. I don't really believe in it, to be honest. If you want, you can try and somehow slightly recreate it here through maybe additional keys, since this cycle doesn't need a second part. In a double sinusoid, you don't need to flip anything. If this pause happened here, we can recreate it somehow, for example, with keys. Well, something averaged between 2 keys. I don't know if this is noise from the mocap data or if this really happens, but let's say it happens. A bit of this sharpness. Well, all right, let it be like this. You can shift the extreme a little bit. Since I'm working inside the cycle and this cycle equals 15 frames, I can do whatever I want inside the cycle. This is the overall freedom of complete action. Here, in a double sine wave or single one, that's for sure, rotate X is ready. There's some Y, but there are also some oscillations here. This is the neck rotating around its axis. This is it. This is something completely negligible. You can delete it, reset the value to 0. Rotate X exists. Rotate Z. This is about swaying left-right. All of this very much resembles a single sine wave. Here's the extreme, here's the extreme. The other one is also exactly half and half. Everything matched up. The swaying is exactly like that. Both of them have some kind of pattern. There's a tilt, pause, continuation of the tilt. Tilt, pause even in the opposite direction, continuation of the tilt. Choose what's more convenient for you, what you like better. For some reason, I like this animation piece better. I select it, loop it, edit, copy, edit, paste, place it right here and flip everything in the opposite direction. Uh-huh. If we compare what's being created now through this looping with what was before, basically the same character. Maybe slightly, just a little different there, but that's already a matter of some. Which piece did you choose and what did you do with it? Also made a small smooth. Maybe I'll make this transition softer somehow so there won't be any strange movement. Here too. In general, it turns out that rotate Z left-right swaying can also be somewhat more complex, more detailed. I think this kind of non-uniformity of this sine wave makes this walk more, well, realistic. The rotates are ready, the neck is there, same thing for the head. There are some patterns. You can work with them. I'll leave the head because it would take very long now, the lecture, if I were to clean everything up. Generally, I'll leave you a lot of freedom here, including with the shoulders. Find the patterns that occur, because here, when the arm goes back, it jerks a little. Is this normal? Is it needed? Is it not needed? Should you remove this? Should you not remove this? Rotate X is generally spinning backwards. Well, in this area plane, I don't think this plays any important role. I create an extreme here, delete this piece. Smooth, smooth, smooth. And everything will be fine anyway. We get the sine wave plus minus anyway. Moreover, it turns out that it came to one side and immediately left. Here it hung around a little, but it's a single sine wave or something close to it. You can also clean up and adjust single sine waves. Also single sine waves with some small pause during movement. So the shoulder goes forward, stopped, went forward again. Goes back, stopped, went back again. The only thing is that right now it's not symmetrical, but you already know how to do this. This is frame 16, here it is +1, so this is exactly half from frame 16. Let's check. 0. 15, so we can definitely select this animation curve, edit, copy, edit, paste, and for example, flip it vertically to get this more symmetrical story. So I'll run through the curves and suggest you clean up the rest yourselves so we don't waste time. The essence is the same, finding patterns and working with them. This is rotate Y. This is the hand rotating around its own axis. Is it really true that here the hand will suddenly turn sharply in the opposite direction and continue further? Possibly yes, maybe not. What else? We're talking about this hand not having other rotate X. There's something here, but it's insignificant. I don't really like that these controls are rotated. This hand is rotated in this way. This is what also comes from the Mocap, and this is wrong. So first I'll just do smooth, smooth, smooth. This will automatically start to gradually align, align, align. But I'll find some average value. This is roughly 21 degrees. Good. Remember that. We made this minus 21 degrees in total to remove some animation on rotations. And here you can add these 21 degrees, for example, if you want. Rotate the hand slightly somewhere here. It was 10, so it should be minus 10. Basically, we check both hands, or maybe something slightly averaged. So what was on that control now? I'm transferring to this control. Further, returning to this control, rotate Z, this is what makes the hand go toward and away from you. The hand can't do that. This is an error from the Mocap. Here are its erroneous fluctuations, 3 degrees. Actually, minus 3 plus 1, 4 degrees of error. We zero it out. I don't think this played any big role. This control will only bend like this. Look, here, in principle, it already looks pretty good as it is. You can also smooth it slightly, make it more fluid. Maybe here make some transition more natural. This buffer curve really helps to see what was before. And somehow, maybe if I want some more precise detail there, let it be the same, but smoother. Here, there are no Ys, this isn't there. Wrist. There is animation. Let's see what kind. Wrist 2. Imagine this is a sensor that's somewhere nearby, one on the wrist, and another might be where the fingers attach. It's short. And it's difficult for these cameras and program code to calculate the angle. So the smaller the details, the more noise. If there are fingers in the mocap, either the mocap was made with special gloves, but they're also not accurate enough, or an animator simply cleaned it up on top. It's not unlikely that Mixamo mocap files went through some additional cleanup. Not that it's unlikely, I'm saying for sure that they went through some cleanup. That's why they're so cool and beautiful. Usually mocap is just trash and chaos. It's like everything gets turned inside out. That's why I didn't take it. I'd rather do it myself. No translates, cool, rotates, but they're doing something with their hands. I don't know if they really need this lag. Explore. Maybe this lag is about the hand moving slightly forward, backward. Unlikely. There, doesn't look like it. Overall, fluctuations from -8 to -3 to 8 something. Up to 8.5 degrees. I don't think these two solve anything. This looks like noise. For me, this also looks more like noise. Won't jerk around like that for character. In general, I'm starting to do some rougher cleanup, getting smoother animation curves. Most likely, this will be something closer to this. This is rotation around its own axis. Yeah, the hand wasn't moving, then suddenly turned back and forth and kept going. This is definitely noise from mocap data. You can delete this. And in general, the fluctuations around Y are just negligible here. So you can smooth all this out and let it move somehow. Yes, whatever pattern there is, you can remove the extra keyframes. Rotate Z, what's that for us? This back and forth thing. Well, I don't know. It's complicated. I'll try to smooth it first. Then, if something remains, we can think about it some more. In principle, there's something to it. Maybe the only thing that's important is that the beginning and end of the cycle behave more predictably somehow. I don't like this abrupt stop. Either smooth it out here, somehow. There. But I don't really like this part. I'll remove keys here, remove keys here. Let there be some pause, but it will be much smoother. Because somehow these sharp stops in the movement scare me. There. What's left for the head? Rotate X, this is classic, nodding forward and backward. If you look closely, this is also a sine wave that's like this, but just hit somewhere, miss somewhere else. Look, here's one piece, 7, 15, somewhere another piece. I need this to be a sine wave and a double one. It's unlikely that head nodding could be calculated well either. I'll probably just delete all this, make a sine wave single and uniform first. Here it is. Here it is double on frame 15, and I shift it along the same extremes. If you look a little closer, it seems like something like this was intended. These extremes. The nodding was more somewhere, earlier somewhere, later somewhere. But to fit into the cycle, it should be like this. We can adjust this key somehow. You want it this way, but it would be strange to do it like that because one nod is big, another is small, something more averaged perhaps. Rotate Y, you can sense a pattern. There are sinusoid extremes. One, another. Then some kind of curl. And again, this is the head swaying left-right. I'm not sure about this curl. Because it's here, but not in the other part. Ideally, there should be something here too. Honestly, this really reminds me of something maybe, this can definitely be smoothed out too. As if, well, as if the speech was about something bigger like that. Well, really, maybe, like in her walk, we're still people after all. Somewhere nodded more, somewhere a little, I don't know, the surface was uneven, put the foot slightly differently. This could really create some variety. But since I'm working on more of a cohesive story, symmetrical one, I can make this more symmetrical here. So, but the character of movement is there. And if you look at the animation curve, everything becomes, generally speaking, okay. Same story here. This piece, this cycle, it's not symmetrical because it's not in the right place. Here, it's 14. And here's another. Well, I think that if 14, if this was a cycle, then it would be like this. Something like this, just with an offset. This is that same offset we're talking about. It's unlikely that when she was swaying, she could go more in one direction, less in another. And generally, this behaves strangely somehow. So this cleanup gradually makes the animation smoother and more natural when we get this needed control method. What's also important, you check all the time. This is how much to the left, that much to the right. These are rotates in Y, probably first of all, because here 44 to 45, still more or less okay. Left-right swaying, in principle, I was generally trying to be careful, but here, for example, 3 divisions and a small one, and here 2. That is, in principle, to be more precise, yes, this is translate X left-right. I'll align it. Here, I'm interested in translate X all, well, here I was making it symmetrical anyway. Head swaying left-right like this relative to 0. It turns out she's now walking all the time, slightly turned, so to speak, in this direction. But ideally, she turns as much to the left as she turns to the right. This also needs to be kept in mind all the time. This certain symmetry. This is also, of course, absolutely a matter of style. Maybe it's fine for you as is. But if we're talking about some kind of standardization, then it's about this. So, long and meticulous work. And for it to be really cool, like for this to be really ingrained in your subconscious, you'll probably have to do this several times. I would suggest you start with this cycle. Find it. Maybe I'll attach it to the learning materials. And for example, make your own. This is something that really structures things, I think. Because at first, when you open these graphs, it will seem like chaos to you. All of this. But I've already done this several times, and even now, preparing for the lecture, I was writing, well, I was already working through the animation, so to speak. I'm doing it now, and I can see even these same patterns faster and faster. So this is something that's purely based on experience. You need to do this several times and work it through. When you're done with this symmetry and all this pelvis stuff, you can go back to the legs and see how much the leg is being stretched there. Maybe it got a bit overstretched here. Once we've somewhat fixed our understanding of what the pelvis should look like, only then can we go back to the legs and work on them. Because, well, firstly, everything is more symmetrical now, and overall we can work with it more specifically. What's important is probably to try to solve everything possible through controls, namely all the knee pops, and then reparent this offset control and see what we end up with. Are there any pops, jerks? Can we fix them more hardcore, manually tweak them a bit? Be careful with excessive fluctuations so the leg doesn't become too rubbery. For example, I see that all this here doesn't look very good somehow. I think, well, no, I'd rather go back and work on the level. Why did the leg stop lifting here? Maybe here it makes sense to slightly change the key and make this lift faster so the knee doesn't stick. This will be through this control and through this control. Let's look somewhere around here. We don't need to step like that anymore, don't need to lift so quickly because the pelvis has leveled out a bit, became more symmetrical. Remember, our pelvis was going strongly forward on one side and slightly on the other. This also strongly affected the knee. Now they're symmetrical, and having adjusted one leg, I can be confident that the other will behave exactly the same way. If you want to check yourself, turn on the light source display. There aren't any, so it will be a flat fill. But the material has lighting, so something is visible. Turn on the default shader and take a look. The first and last frames are definitely identical. This is a fundamental rule. Ideally, if the beginning of 0 and the middle of the cycle are also similar. I have some inconsistencies here. They're largely due to the fact that I was just fixing this leg, the one closest to us. and the other one remained old. What you can notice is that the arms are different. I didn't make them symmetrical either, didn't shift them by half a cycle yet. I see that here, for example, something's happening with the chest. This is about the fact that, for example, it's still not symmetrical. Obviously, this is a cycle. Obviously, it should be uniform. Obviously, it should be 15 frames long and all. Now, 0.15 at least doesn't cause problems with chest movement. These inaccuracies can always be checked. Beginning and end is sacred. It would be nice if the middle also matched, so this is about working with Mocap. I think this work is largely based on a clear understanding of how it works even without Mocap, and Mocap gives you the opportunity to see more subtle things. And become an animator. If you do this mindfully, become a more experienced animator. So that's all. It's a big lecture, lots of work. All right, see you later. Bye.